So, first of all, welcome and thank you for being here. My name is Pablo Reguerin. I have the pleasure of serving as the Assistant Vice Provost for Student Success. I also direct the EOP office on campus, and I'm the staff co-chair to the HSI team that we have here on our campus. I think what we want to do is first introduce everybody, was what was mentioned, and then we'll jump into the presentation. Do you want to go next?
So, hi, my name is Charis Tarzan, and I am the Director for Learning Support Services and the HSI Initiatives.
I'm Nandini Bhattacharya. I taught the collaborative learning Math 2 in the fall, and I work with the HSI team in developing the pedagogy for these courses.
I'm Arnold Sanchez-Ordaz. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of Education, and I currently serve as a data analyst for the team.
I'm Nancy Cox-Kankowski. I direct the ACE program, and my name's just there. I'm not going to talk today. I'll talk a different day.
You'll see a lot of ACE-like things in where they come from. We also want to acknowledge we have many partners, and I think our approach to looking at what does it mean for UC Santa Cruz to be a Hispanic serving institution really has been embedded in an equity framework, but also in a partnership framework. Knowing that if we're going to do this work, it has to be spread across the campus. It's about changing culture, it's about looking at our institutional identity, and a number of things that I'm going to talk about. But I want to be clear that even beyond the presenters here, there are many departments, staff that have been involved, faculty. In fact, I want to say how grateful I am for everybody's time. One of the most precious things we have is our time, and people have been very giving, whether they're paid on the grant or not paid on the grant. And so we're very grateful for everyone that's come out from different disciplines and areas of study, and staff and students who also have been raising their voices more loudly with us, which I actually do appreciate very much. But it is about an institution partnership and not just any single part. So let me just a little bit of context and turn it over to the experts to talk a little bit more. As I mentioned before, the concept of what does it mean to be an HSI. So initially, the EVC's Campus Provost, one of the goals for the 5 of 2015 campaign, 5 goals, was to become an HSI. But we really didn't know a lot in terms of defining what does that mean. And so one of the places, and I would say we're still evolving what that definition means. In fact, in the research literature, the concept of what it even means to serve a student is still something that is debated. But it's really going to come down to how we create our institutional identity, our daily experiences, and how we construct this identity ourselves. So it's not going to be given to us by the federal government or any other external group. It's really about us looking at our own reforms at ourselves. And so a lot of it is set around an equity framework. That also includes embracing the shift in demographics that we have in the state of California, also across our country, while we reject the deficit perspective. And I think as educators, we all know that the deficit perspective is very prevalent in K-12 education as well as higher education. And so if we're looking at, a changed demographic, different populations that are also racialized, groups that have been marginalized in our society, it's really important that we also adopt the rejecting a deficit perspective in our own practices, both individually, in the classroom, as staff, as well as in our policies and looking at the institutional barriers. So one of the, some of the literature that we've had followed is Estela Ben-Simon, who's one of the foremost experts on race in higher education. And one of the things that she posits is for institutions to confront equity issues by setting a vision and benchmarking achievement patterns to understand what is happening at our particular campus. One of her recommendations is that people be race conscious, that not try to mute race under an umbrella of diversity, not really understanding what we're looking at. And so in many ways, the equity framework, it's not exclusive to issues of race, but looking at racial equity as an important component of what we mean when we talk about an equity framework. And so one of the things is outing issues through the use of data, and then coming up with a plan to align your financial and human capital to address those issues. And so one of the things that she talks about is that one of the reasons why 50 years after the civil rights movement, we still have persistent, disparate achievement patterns for African American, Latino, students of color in general, is because we're not looking at these issues. In fact, we've weakened them by looking at kind of just an umbrella perspective, or diversity umbrella perspective, and losing a focus. And that's one of the things she contributes to. Again, not to say that's the only thing that we look at, but we need to understand, we need to set a vision, and then we need to benchmark. Where are we at? Are our issues more pronounced in writing, or in math, or in physics? where are our pockets of success? How do we build upon those things? And so the idea is that we try to set a campus vision, and this is just a starting point, not at all adopted. But if we set a vision, an aspirational equity goal is, to use her language, then we begin to benchmark internally. How are we doing in this department? What is EOP doing? What are we doing in terms of our classroom practices, and that may influence these outcomes, and then you work towards them. So it's a process of being committed to sustained inquiry. There is no magic bullet. There is not one recipe on how to educate Latino students or low-income students or EOP students, et cetera. It's about engaging in a sustained inquiry process, using data to help inform that process, but it's really the mindset, engaging in an equity mindset. So one of the things we've been sharing with folks is this starting point for a vision, and it is definitely just a draft, which is that UC Santa Cruz, if we're going to say we're serving students, that we need to know that we're graduating high-achieving Latino and all students, as well as conducting ongoing inquiry, the sustained inquiry to support equity goals and contribute to the academic pipeline across all the divisions. We already have an 80% graduation rate goal on our campus. That's a Frosh 6-year graduation rate. That's the UC average. And what we want to do, we also added a GPA because we feel that there needs to be an indicator of the quality of the experience. We probably should have a metric about campus climate, about sense of belonging, others as well, but we already got kind of wordy with this vision statement. But it's meant to say that success and serving a student goes far beyond just the GPA. I mean, those are important, don't get me wrong, but we still have to understand what that means. I also want to add one other piece. It's very common for institutions to, as they're looking at their equity data or looking at different factors, to think of underprepared students. And that becomes kind of a code word for, well, if we just had better prepared students, if we could just select better students, then some of these issues would go away. And so part of this means, if we're going to look at ourselves, is also we should acknowledge that, yeah, it's not like K-12 education is getting better, particularly for marginalized communities, some of the fastest growing communities like Latino students and others. And we know there's all other factors that intersect with race, opportunity, income, quality of schools, etc. However, we also want to acknowledge that as an institution, we also may be underprepared to educate the changed demographics. So it's looking at the other side of the equation. How prepared are our faculty to teach this new demographic? How prepared is student services to serve students that may be coming with different needs, or have housing or food insecurity issues, or have coming from a different experience? And so it's questioning that side of it as well. And one of the things I heard at a conference that I thought was really important is what happens to an HSI when you have the compounding impact of both underprepared students, which we could acknowledge we have some underprepared students, and then you have underprepared faculty, let's say in their teaching or their pedagogical practice, to teach that changed demographic. And it's both of those things together that compound some of the issues that we have. And so we want to we clearly want to see what the demographics and what the academic strengths of the students are that are coming in, but we also want to look at ourselves to see how are we changing as well, so that we share that challenge across our areas, and we're taking ownership over it versus just waiting for the magical students to arrive who will teach themselves. Real quickly, we spent about 2 years as a team before we even considered applying for a grant, because we were very committed to this inquiry model of first of all, asking questions. We didn't even have a guiding question initially. And as we started having more conversations over a couple of years, there's an element of being an HSI, which is kind of technical, counting when you hit 25% and certain definitions for federal eligibility. But then there's a transformational aspect. And as we had more conversations about transforming UC Santa Cruz, we kept having themes that kept emerging. And so the themes that emerged were math, writing, sense of belonging, advising, transfer, particularly as a pathway, as well as pedagogical, faculty, professional development issues. As grant opportunities came upon us, and I would say in our first grant, we weren't even quite ready. We still needed some more time to really understand and dive into kind of what was happening. There's a range of programs that then responded to the very issues. We could find evidence where there are some issues. So that early stage of looking at data and looking at high failure rate courses and looking at UQ surveys and disaggregating them by race and by different factors, these were the themes that emerged. And there's probably more. These happen to also be the ones that corresponded with where there were funding opportunities to address. And so there are 3 grants. I'm not going to go over all of them. at this stage, but you can see they cut across different areas. And I think my time is up, so I'm going to pass it on to my colleagues.
Thank you. So one of the things that Pablo said was trying to out the issues that surround student success, especially around race. So in the beginning stages of the grant, we needed evidence to substantiate some of the hunches that we had around students who were either being successful or not in certain courses. So once the course was identified, once Math 2 was identified as a potential starting point for equity issues or disparities in achievement, we needed the evidence to substantiate that claim. So my job was to come in and actually try to provide that evidence for the team, which was then included in the grant and then sent to the Department of Education. What you see here is one piece of many that was used as an evidence base to show disparity. So what you're seeing here is a graph of students who took Math 2 and the percentage rates for the year 2011 and 2012, comparing white and Latino students. And if you see the red line, you see that Hispanic Latino students are on average scoring more at about a C range, and white students are scoring more about a B, A range. So that was just one of the many pieces of evidence to try to paint a picture about what was happening on our campus. But one of the things to be very conscious about is that oftentimes we may have these hunches or these myths about what's happening with our student community, but we can't really pinpoint them unless we have that evidence. Here are just some examples of the myths that have circulated around the campus. Myth 1, Math 2 students are not retained at UCSC. Myth 2, Math 2 students do not graduate in STEM majors. And myth 3, Math 2 content is remedial. Okay? So one of the ways to try to see whether these myths are actually true or they have some sort of evidence behind them so that we can actually state them as true claims is to look at more data and more evidence. And one of the things that Shars, Herson, and myself were involved in at the very early stages of our work was to try to use this ribbon tool to track student trajectories over time. So what you see here in this line here is the fall 2010 cohort of students who took Nandini's math class. And then what you see at the very end here is the winter 2016 endpoint. So you see how students performed in the math class by grade. And then at the very end here, you see who actually ended up graduating and in what area. So some of the takeaways of this graph here are that this orange group here are the students who actually ended up leaving campus. Okay, and this is 22% of the total beginning sample. Okay, 150 students graduated by 2016. 59% of the students graduated in social science. 29% graduated in STEM. 20% graduated in the humanities. And then, as you can see, if we were to drill down a little bit more, we could get more granular information about student trajectories, but those were just some of the major takeaways of this analysis and allowed us to try to debunk some of the myths that people held about student trajectories on campus. Okay?
Can I ask a question? Yeah, so you said 22% left by over 10 years, or over 6 years.
Over 6 years.
What's the... That's roughly the campus, right? Of Leading,
yeah, it's very, it's about
20%. 20%. Okay.
Yeah.
When we took the snapshot at the 5-year point, we saw it was about 75% that had graduated, so it was on par. We actually expected, I'm be real honest about my misconceptions about Math 2 students too. I expected it to be, there to be a gap between other students and Math 2 students.
Yeah.
So now, I'm going to turn it over to Yandini.
So this is some of the theories of change with respect to how the pedagogy was developed. And the three main kind of the pillars in which the pedagogy was developed was coming from these three different theories. One is the diverse learning environments. So kind of creating a scaffolding of teaching in an active learning mode where instructor, graduate students, undergraduate tutors, advising, all of us are working together and create a kind of a community of learning where students could get whatever that they needed to get at that point, but there are different levels of expertise and different levels of kind of perspectives that students have. And the collaborative learning workshop is the model that ACE comes into. That's the professional development that Yuri Treisman started in Berkeley. That was my previous life when I used to work with ACE. And we went and observed how, so he asked the question that, how come in certain ethnic groups, especially in Asian ethnic groups, students are all working together and succeeding in examinations or any kind of testing environment, whereas in certain ethnic groups where they were not as collaboratively working, did not. And that inquiry developed the professional development program in Berkeley, and then ACE was modeled after that. And so creating a discussion section where students are working together with graduate students and undergraduates is what the Treisman model says. And this zone of the ZPD, which is basically like that gap of learning, like the gap between an expert student and a novice student, or between the undergraduate who is in junior or senior year and who may be just a STEM major or a math major or a bio major, it doesn't matter. So creating these type of gaps of learning between the people as they worked in a community setting is what was the pedagogical structure. And giving some sense of learners' autonomy. In other words, the kind of developing some questions where students are actually interested in looking at those through the lenses of those kind of questions where we are setting up, like, why do you need to learn this? How is it going to be useful to you? Where is it connected to real world? And that's how you kind of get them talking, and you kind of get them to vest some interest in it and be ready to improvise. Because when we go into an active learning setting with a set script, it often does not promote active learning. It promotes some kind of that kind of tug of war between the student and the teacher, and you kind of don't shift. If you don't shift enough, then that falls apart, and then you kind of feel frustrated that I didn't get to teach the way I wanted to teach. So these are the basic kind of the models that the theory models that we started the pedagogy to improve on. So again, the purpose is to increase achievement and disrupt this pattern that why the students of certain ethnic minorities are consistently doing below, and we wanted to disrupt that pattern. That was the goal. Put quality of instructor and instructor first. So instead of kind of trying to put together like a learning environment where we were not 100% vested, we wanted to put quality of instruction first. Strengthen support, and so in that endeavor we increase the TA to student ratios. Usually in math it's 1:100. We made that 1:50. So for every 50 students we had one TA, and we had 2 undergraduate tutors who were working with them. And again, this learning study team environment, we address some academic literacy and language barriers by making sure that problems were multi-represented in a way that always language is not the only way they could understand what the question is asking. So more usage of diagrams, more usage of graphs, more usage of pictures, and sometimes just like having them reflect and write down what they're thinking before they come to the right answers. And we also used a kind of like an advising support where we looked at we sat down every week, looked at students in a granular level and figured out who is at risk and what's the reason that student is at risk. If it is academic, we took care of it in the teaching team. If it was more of a counseling issue, or it was some financial situations, something that is happening which is beyond classroom experience, we had a EOP advisor who they worked with their interns and brought the students in, talked to them. So it was just a holistic approach to learning, where learning is not just a transfer of information, but actually the people that are that are involved. Why is it? What are the barriers? And we wanted to just take those away. And there was
Could I add one thing?
Yes.
Sorry,
please.
the high perfection, high support is the concept that you set really high standards the rigor of the curriculum was increased. There were also more exams that were provided, so more of a feedback loop to the students. But the sense of creating a caring environment with very high standards, and that combination, that those two things can coexist, and that particularly students that are coming from marginalized backgrounds need that kind of support. They need high standards, but they also need a caring environment, and trying to really put in those things together. The other piece I wanted to mention overall too was just in many ways in education we use the term dumping ground. Whenever there is students or in an area where we might have low expectations of them, and I'm talking institution, I'm not talking about any one department, any one person. As we looked at this issue and we looked at the level of investment we've had in this area, I would say it was being reduced overall as an institution. And so the idea was, how can we take something that you could call a dumping ground and flip it on its head into a launching pad? How could this be the launching pad? That requires investment, it requires a caring environment, as well as requiring very high standards. So not we feel sorry for you because you didn't place in higher, you come from this background and the other. And I think that part is really important, and we did make an attempt. That also required everybody, for it to be a cohesive experience where the TAs were going to lecture, where the advisor was integrated to the instructional team, kind of blurring the line between advising and instruction.
And I also want to point out that this, so for example, to give a concrete example to what Pablo just said, like when the teaching assistants were doing so much of following through with the students and kind of mentoring them on the side as they interacted with them during section and office hours, so grading was difficult for them, and they voiced that, and they said, look, we are, they are also in a union, and we have to be very careful about how we are using their time. So then we brought in some graders, so the feedback kind of went away for not the exams, but just for the worksheets that they worked on. I worked with the grader to give some kind of assessment that was formative, and the TAs were more not in the picture. So we kind of shifted our responsibilities, and the meetings is like, how can we help you so that this is our goal and we can achieve that together. So this is the traditional versus what Math 2 did. So it's a comparison. Basically, I kind of went over most of it. The high support and the level of instruction, the rigor of the instruction. We had 270 students in a standard Math 2 class, and we proposed 270, but we were able to give two different formats of Math 2. One was this collaborative learning, and another one was more adaptive, and that was taught by Deborah Lewis. So we split the 270 between two of us. The lecture met 3 times a week. That was the same. The section, the contact hours went up. So in the form of before 2016, the sections used to meet once a week. We made that twice a week, and basically transformed the sections into more of an active learning environment. And then you can see that previously it was traditional lecture based. We transformed it into a hybrid model, and I'll tell you the active learning part came in some of the basic, the pre-knowledge, what we kind of think the students should already know, and in reality, as we know, they always don't know. I made videos, they watched those videos. I then tagged the quizzes with those videos so that they couldn't take the quizzes unless they watched the videos. And then when they came to lecture, we actually did more involved, more multi-layered, more in-depth questions where students were actively participating in unfolding and unpacking the concepts. So again, the support team was 175 students, 4 TAs. The TAs went through 2 full-day training in the fall. We are going to improve on this training piece in a much greater way for the next year, and we'll talk about that when we talk about our future plans. And again, the Math 2 teaching team, the graduate students, the undergraduates, myself, and the advisor all came together, followed through, and figured out what were some of the barriers. And we were successful in using, in being able to take away some of the barriers, but we were not 100% successful. So we have to improve on that as well. So the active learning component was both in lecture and in sections, but the two pedagogy was interwoven. So they worked on carefully chosen problems that was introduced in lecture, and it was somewhat like maybe we took one question and went in depth, but then they went to the sections and they practiced that more. They worked with their peers, their LSS tutors, and then I used Reef polling software in the fall, but now I'm using the Canvas quiz mode, which is wonderful. So it's much better because you can actually think about what type of conceptual questions you want to ask students ahead of time and not at the moment. So it's less like a response, it's not as much of a response mechanism, it's much more of like thinking ahead of time and really creating kind of an experiential learning for the students that I think being able to do that with Canvas, and Canvas has that feature and it's very easy to use. So I think we talked about that, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So here is a sample worksheet problem. There has to be a math problem since I am standing in front of here. So the big one was that Math 2 is it's too elementary. The rigor is not there. It's mathematically not very heavy duty. But if we look at Math 2 as a way that we are creating the foundation, then here is an example where they have to solve a question where they have to optimize with given parameters. So that's the kind of thinking they have to do in no matter what STEM field they are in. They have certain parameters, they have boundary conditions, and they have to maximize, optimize some certain functions, some certain operations, etc. So this is a question that we did where students worked on it, and it's not just the verbal component of it that made students understand what the question is. There is a graph, there is a diagram, they played with it, they made models, they made it longer, shorter, square, rectangle, and then they came to a conclusion that was mathematically kind of founded in mathematics, but they also had an experience of finding the conclusion of that question. And that's like what I'm seeing in active learning is as I study this more and more, this is the most difficult thing to do, is take our traditional training and format it in a way that it creates an experience for students. And some models, and we really have to kind of take the focus away from us as teachers and put the focus more on the students and how they learn. And that process is very difficult, and I think it's very incremental in the way that I feel that I am progressing. So advising piece was very important because of the holistic approach and being able to look at a student not as just at his or her performance in a math course, but like what it is that goes on, and creating an early alert where students were, if they didn't do it, so we gave 4 tests and a midterm. So every other week we saw how they are doing, kind of a formative way to see if somebody was not performing, and then we contacted them and we talked to them, and we found out some of the issues were really lack of preparation, so that we could do something about, or if it was more financial, that also we were able to give them some help. So the advisor came to the classes 3-4 times during the quarter to create some kind of, the students saw the advisors as an alliance, as somebody they could come and talk to, and then there were also undergraduate peer advisors.
Could I say one thing about the
Yeah,
advising?
yeah.
One of the things that we were finding, and because this was an experiment, we've never tried this before, is assigning a counselor to a course and seeing how that interaction happens. One of the things that we found is that we think it's more relationship based. So there are early alert models that are very technical based. The red flag goes up on a student, advisor goes and contacts student. But we actually think in order for this to work and to be well integrated just in time when somebody needs it, the instructional team and the advisor have to know each other. There has to be a relationship. That referral process and follow-up is embedded across both of them caring. So just something that we're going to continue to look at. It was difficult to do. I want to say it was not easy to develop. Yeah.
When did the counselor have a chance to speak with the student? Did it happen in section or?
It happened in lectures.
Peer advisors went to lectures, but mostly in lecture. Go ahead.
Yeah, so they came to lectures, and we had some events, like they have some exam review, some prep, like some just in general some review sessions that they came and announced and then said, and then the advisors went to those review sessions and talked to the students. He also came to the lectures, and sometimes he hung out after lecture and the students came and talked to him. He says, if anybody has any pressing issues they want to talk about, make an appointment, I'm here. So he's kind of created that relationship with the students in different places, mostly in the lecture time, after lecture. So as Pablo said, that it's really a lot of we have a lot of partners, and some of them are actually here. So I went to Wested Summer Institute. I've been getting trained. I'm learning a lot of these things, and it's very, it's wonderful for me to learn these things in a way that I actually, and then practicing them, experimenting with them. We have UCSC Professor George Bunch, who advises us on academic literacy, and as a matter of fact, we are going to an Escala conference this summer where we will be talking about academic literacy. So does Wested. Rebecca, Professor Covarrubias, who has been, she has been teaching. So Rebecca is right here. She came and talked to the TAs and talked to all the teaching team about growth mindset, stereotype threats, what are some of the barriers that are not visible on their test, but that keeps students from doing well. And then, of course, there was a 2-day TA training that we had where we talked about some of the sense of belonging and kind of some thematic development of what it means to give a holistic kind of an approach to learning. I think this is data.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I definitely want to invite Arnold to jump in at any moment. I definitely haven't done all this data on my own, so thank you so much, Arnold, for giving me the chance, though, to present to you some of the results. So we use data to inform our practices. We know that as practitioners, using data is really challenging. There's constantly changes in curriculum, different instructors, TAs, tutors, students all coming in with their various strengths and challenges, size of class, time of class, issues such as housing, mental health issues, food insecurities. All these things are constantly playing a role into what's happening, and so it's really challenging to decide if what we've done as instructors, programs, departments has actually worked. So one of the members of our HSI committee, Professor Catherine Cooper, said, data is kind of like the nesting dolls. You think you have kind of a simple question there, and you find out a little bit of information, and quickly you realize you actually have a lot more dolls there than you had thought. So we started by defining an equity issue. We talked about that. Some of the things that we ask ourselves as a team are, who are our students? What defines success? How do we know that we got there? How is this quality of instruction? As Nandini said, we have goals there, so how are we measuring that? And then we're going to be looking at student outcomes. So we have things like student grades, grades in subsequent math courses. So for here we have Math 3, pre and post exam. So not just looking at grades. We've also started to use regression models that we don't have quite finished, but we're starting on using student characteristics. Obviously, we want things like graduation rates and preferred majors. Things like that are much more challenging as they're 6 years away. And we've also started to try to understand the student's experience a little bit more with sense of belonging, persisting, math self-efficacy. Those we're also, again, not going to be able to report on today, but some of the things that we're taking into consideration. One of the other things that, as Pablo mentioned, the importance of disaggregating your data by race, ethnicity, gender, and so really trying to understand, and that's really where you get the idea about the equity issues. And as we've mentioned, we're really here, our goal here is really to disrupt those patterns. So in Math 2, our goal is probably to increase the grade for a couple of reasons. What we've seen traditionally in Math 2 is that students perform almost a full grade lower in Math 3. So we're thinking if we can raise the Math 2 grade for all students, hopefully the impact will be that they'll raise their Math 3 grades as well. Many of you were here when John Tampkin was here, and he showed sort of the gap analysis. So that's one of our other goals, is to decrease that gap. And again, most students are actually in Math 2 not to finish with Math 2, because Math 2, although it does count towards graduation, it doesn't have a GE associated with it. So generally, you're needing Math 3. One of the things in the ribbon analysis that Arnold showed earlier, in that analysis, about a third of the students graduated with degrees that required calculus. Many of those in STEM fields, but also in economics. About a third of the students graduated with degrees that required pre-calculus, and about a third of the students ended up in a degree that didn't have a math requirement associated with it.
Here.
So, quick review of who are our students. We know they have A through G requirements. We know they have to do well. They have to get B's or better. Our students are really high achieving. Last year, the average high school GPA was a 3.7. We know they need 3 years of mathematics, or they can satisfy that with SATs. We know they're in the top 9%, either by state or local context. We know that all of these students definitely have this ability to have the transformative experience. So in Math 2, so the blue bar on all of these is is information from the fall 2013. This is the year that we use as our baseline. In the red is fall 2016, so this is the cohort that we've just been talking about. And the orange is mostly UCSC Frosh, so kind of giving you a sense as to where we are. So here you can see we're underrepresented, and along here is percentages. So we're in Math 2, we're underrepresented in Asian, overrepresented in Black, overrepresented in Hispanic or Latino, a little bit underrepresented, but it's climbing in 2 or more. And underrepresented in white, although interestingly this last year we had quite, percentage-wise we had more white students, but if you actually look at the end value, we had about the same number. Over in the left-hand corner, we're overrepresented in female, overrepresented in first generation. And just to give you a sense of math SAT, on average our students came in this year with an SAT score of about 630, and Math 2 has consistently been around just about 500.
Sure, can I ask you a question on
Yeah.
this? And this is something I just don't know. Are Latino students overrepresented as women? What is the gender?
There is a gap, but it's not, it's it's less than 5%.
It is, okay, so it's
and,
not.
and that's true for all groups. I mean, there's
Okay.
definitely more women across all racial groups.
Right.
But what I can tell you from fall Math 10 to fall 14, when Arnold did the gender analysis, Math 2 has consistently had between 65 and 1 year it had 70% female. So in generally, that's what I was saying.
That's where you are about here.
Yeah.
70,
That's actually been true across historically. And so one of the things we talked about too is kind of a gender equity goal within this
There's
as
two
well,
things going
particularly
on.
for STEM based. But it definitely has been true in the Math 2 enrollment, even with the fluctuations in size.
When I looked at the gender, it was 50-50, which I was surprised. I thought we were more like 35 female, but at least this incoming class was really close to 50-50. So.
Which is new from different
Yeah, yeah.
past history.
So one of the ways that we were trying to evaluate how effective was the teaching, how effective is the training, things like that, we did some mid-quarter evaluations. So in our mid-quarter evaluations, we used constructs that were, so we were interested in given constructs like involvement, cohesion, satisfaction. So we selected questions that had been previously validated through factor analysis. Did I get that right? Thanks, Arnold. So some of the things that we were interested in over here on the far end, students pay attention in section, or pay attention to what others are saying. So this was a construct for involvement. Coming this way, students in this class get to know each other well, so that's a construct for cohesion. After class, the students have a sense of satisfaction. This class is organized, task-oriented. So overall, you can see, and as just, so we did this both in Math 2 in the fall. We also did it again in Nandini's class in Math 3 in the winter. The model's a little bit different, but it's kind of nice to just have another point to kind of have an idea of what's going on there. So we can see that in Math 2, it was pretty high. We'd hope that has something to do with the professional development we were doing with the TAs, but we also know that just meeting twice a week with your TAs, that's probably also going to increase all these things. They're going to get to know the students more, they're going to get to know their TA more. So that's not totally surprising, but validating that it's happening. So some of you may have seen this before. It's been in a few presentations. But here is, so the bubble chart, for those of you, again, I think many of you have seen them before, but you're taking the course grades and converting it into a GPA. So you have the GPA along the y-axis here. Along the x-axis, we start here in fall 2010, which was the first year that Nandini taught, and then we move all the way out to fall 2016, which was our most recent year. So here, what's interesting is that we do see some sort of parallels around the investment and what the models are, and when we invest more, the students do better. So that's our yay data point there at the end. We disaggregated this one by race, so again, you're seeing the gaps here. So here we have a model where we had Math 2 stretch. We had once a week and twice a week sections that were offered through LSS. And this year we stopped having Math 2 stretch and we just had once a week mandatory sections though still. We also implemented a coaching program that included more small group tutoring. In fall 2014, we didn't have mandatory sections anymore. Based on that one quarter, the division quickly responded and added in graduate student TAs the very next quarter. So that was not intentional. I think we thought we were having a good model there, and it was quickly learned that non-mandatory sections wasn't really appropriate here. So in fall 2015, we have Alex is now in place, is now really our placement test, so that's another thing that changes. And then you can see the best thing that we have here is that, again, the grant is institutional building. We raise the votes of all students. We still have the gap, so we're still working on that one, but we do have improvement. As I mentioned earlier, we have traditionally seen this decrease from Math 2 to Math 3. So our baseline year that we use is fall 2013. Here we've now just isolated students who went on to Math 3 the next quarter. So you'll see the gap here isn't as large, although we do have the gap in Math 3. Here, like I said, we are seeing this downward trend, but the increase that we saw in Math 2 in fall 2016 did carry through to the winter Math 3. So that again is kind of reaching this goal that we wanted, where here the average grade for our Latino students was about a 2.0, so about a C. Here we're getting up towards like a C+. A similar analysis, but EOP, so we often use EOP as a proxy for first generation and low income. And again, you can see the same sort of thing here. We're in the 13-14 year, we see this downward trend. Overall, we've moved everything up.
So I think when I was looking at it and I was trying to connect it to what I see in the classroom, so I think the biggest barriers that a lot of these students are coming with is lack of preparation. What we think they know, it's far from what they know sometimes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they can pick that up quickly. So that this gap that you see over here and the gap that is bridging slowly over 10 weeks period is basically how we were able to kind of fill in some of the big gaps that are the misconceptions of certain like mathematical facts, because it's just not doing, but it is also undoing a lot of the constructs that they come with. And I think that gap is what we are going to be looking at for the next year and how to bridge it more quickly than we were able to do it this year.
Actually, the next slide's yours because it's the pre and post test.
Okay. So the next slide is a test that we gave to this cohort of students, and it was the light color is how they did. This is the MDDP test, which is the placement test that we used to have in place 5 years ago. That was this is a standardized test made by California. What is it? Development Testing Project, Mathematics Development Testing Project, and it kind of these are some of the basic concepts: linear, polynomial, rational, function. Geometry, we don't have a whole lot of geometry going in Math 2, so there is not a big gap. So this was a test that is standardized, taken by community college, state universities. We gave it to them in the beginning, and we gave it to the students on their last day of instruction. And this is how much they have improved in this given structure. And this test has nothing to do with us, because it's Scantron test. It is pretty much math department administers the whole thing. So this was hopeful, and I was really happy to see that all these major concepts, that's what basically they need to work when they enroll in Math 3 or in calculus. There was a significant increase in their knowledge. So this is my concluding thoughts, being somebody from the East. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So I wanted to introduce the entire community that helped make this class what it was in the fall. So can I invite the graduate students, the undergraduate, Rebecca, everybody who have impacted the success of this course, because it is something that is a labor of love. All of us talk about it, think about it continuously, argue about it sometimes. So please come to the front and show what it means to be together. Come on, don't be shy. So Stephen, Elijah, and Bob, these are the three of the 4 TAs. My 4th TA is in a wedding, so he was off the hook. And these are all my undergraduates that helped us. And Rebecca is a professor in psychology, and she helped us think about what we are doing constantly. So these are actually very good people to ask questions to. So with that, we'll open the question and answer session. All right, yeah.
Pablo mentioned at the beginning that one of the goals was to hold higher standards. I know that ACE is wonderful in creating required activities as standards, but what do you mean by that? Success level or engagement level?
Engagement. So it's not a performance-based kind of a model that we are going with. It was a mastery-based pedagogy. So so as far as standards of academic rigor is concerned, you guys want to talk about it as a math graduate student? What did you guys think about the lecture content, the worksheet content with respect to what the students were asked to do?
I could say a couple of things, I guess.
Yeah,
I mean, if you are paired with a good instructor who's thoughtful about students' needs, like the worksheet materials and the lecture material is always going to be well thought out, but like the thing that's changing in this university climate-wise is like size of classes and what we have available to us. And I think that they have these concepts that they get taught to them in a lecture with 300 or 400 people, and then like they can sort of play along, but math is kind of, it's a weird thing. Like you need to see someone do it to learn it. You can't even just see all the work, because you need to be able to ask questions exactly at the step that you don't understand. So being able to communicate this to a class when I had 50 total students as opposed to my other classes where I have 120 students now, like, is a huge, huge difference. And on top of that, having the co-leaders, it made it so that there was never a time in class where people had to have nobody seeing to their questions. And additionally, it made it so that I had more flexibility with what I was doing in class. It wasn't like normal, when you have 120 students, you're like, I need to cover the questions that are going to be on the test so that they'll know how to do them so that we can get everybody passing. Whereas if you have this many students, you can adjust what you're doing and you can adjust the way you're teaching it so that you can try to give mastery of all of the concepts, so that they're not just teaching to the test, but they're teaching concepts that, when I teach 11A or 23A, these calculus classes along the line, like they still don't remember their exponent rules or whatever it is. So this gives you the time to like give them a really solid foundation, which it's a shame we don't have the data now, but I'd be really surprised if these students don't do very well if they continue on.
We are beginning to gather the data. It's there.
I mean, to echo a similar sentiment, I mean, the basic problem, I would say, for most calculus classes or just mathematics alone is the fact that most people just do not have a mathematical level of literacy. And the thing that we saw in this class that I can say as someone who's done Math 2 before we started doing this, conceptual understanding. I can't emphasize how important it is, and in this class we saw it way more. When you have people meeting twice a week, you have 20 students in a room with you and an undergrad co-leader, you can have students ask you questions like, what is the domain? Not how do I find it, not what's the trick for the test, what does it mean? And when they have that level of understanding, they don't forget it. It becomes part of you. It's something you can rederive. You can reinvent the wheel. And I saw it in doing Math 3 the following quarter. Those were concepts that it was great. I could go into Math 3, and the people that came into Math 3 that weren't in our Math 2 class, I didn't have to teach anything because there were already people from our Math 2 class telling them how to do it, and it made my life easier. But it was also just nice to see that it stuck, which is not
the
common.
rigor of the worksheets were so that it was very concept-based, but it was also something that they had to, it was packed in a way that they have to look at a bigger concept as an umbrella concept and look at each piece as to how it fits into the big idea. So when they talk about domain, as he explained, it's not that what is the domain of this function, but what it means to be a domain with respect to any function. And they had to kind of do some exploration on that and come up with their own conclusion, which gives them the experience of what it means to look at it.
So the standards are depth of understanding rather than material relative to another version of the course.
Exactly.
I have a question about the grad student experience. And what, well, like next year, if you teach it again, are you thinking of the same 2-day course, or are you thinking of a different, you guys teaching the 2-day course? I mean, I'm curious about, because you do want grad student, this is professional training for you. But how you're going to tailor that as this evolves.
So that's kind of what we are thinking about, and I'm supposed to write up on that pedagogy for Pablo by this Friday. So I can tell you that maybe I don't have to write up on that. So what would be the big goal for teaching Math 2 and Math 3 for me, and I talked to Dave about this yesterday, is to really have these people teach a small course of 60 students or 70 students, where they are getting the experience of teaching a class for themselves, but have a mentor who is helping them develop all the curriculum and how to unpack the curriculum. So that would be hopefully the direction that we go to, because putting these students in a class of 400 students is really, I mean, I realized over the time how painful it is for them to be able to sit through a class that they sat in the back row and so hard to listen to sometimes, and chit-chat going on. No matter how eloquent I am or how much pedagogy I have thought of, the delivery still doesn't happen.
You mentioned that you're using some videos in a sort of flipped classroom, so you use videos and then you have little quizzes that they have to take after they watch the videos, and then in class you can focus on concepts and harder problems, right? So how is this working? How do you know that the students are watching them? And
who is in my, so Catherine, would you please talk about, and Rachel, they are both Math 2, they did Math 2 in the fall and now they are doing Math 3 with me. So do you guys want to talk about that, the real life experience?
Okay, so this was implemented in Math 3 this quarter, and they are taught, it's not right after they watch the video they're given a quiz, it's in lecture they're given the quiz. So they have to come with the basic understanding of the concept, and then they're given an example problem, and it's worked through, and then they're tested on it by having to apply it themselves. They also get to work with their peers, so it's still collaborative. But it kind of, they have to come with the previous knowledge of the basic concept before they're actually able to understand what example Nandini shows.
So,
Oh,
Sorry.
Rachel, your turn.
Yeah, so the lecture videos are videos that they watch at home prior to coming to lecture, and initially we had it where we just had the lecture videos, and then they would come to class and Nandini would introduce the topic in class, having assumed that they had seen the video already, so not super in depth, and then they would be given some type of example problem with Nandini to work out, and then they would be given the quiz, and then during the quiz we walk around and assist them, help them out with questions. And so then we still have that in place, but now they cannot take the quiz unless they have watched the video. So then they watch the video at home, come to lecture, and then to access the quiz in lecture, they must have watched the video at home.
but how do you know they have watched it, or not just played it in the background while doing something else?
Well, I guess that's not something we can, like
more of a reflection in their grade.
That's a reflection
Yeah,
on their grade
so-
and on their understanding when they're doing the quiz. It's really, then they're really suffering during it because they haven't had that initial exposure, and she's not going to give them that foundation.
So I kind of assumed, so what I do is that they're introduced to the topic, they have heard the lecture. These are about 15 minutes to 20 minutes videos on each topic. They're 15 to 20 minutes. And so, because beyond that, I realize attention span is an expensive commodity. So when they come in, I ask them, okay, these are the basic concepts. What do you have question on? Sometimes I know that they have watched because there was something that they did not get when they heard it. So I go more in depth with those basic concepts. Then I do one robust example. Just kind of all the basic concepts are showing up in every pieces of the thing, and they seem to be enjoying, understanding, and that's the satisfaction that I'm getting, is I can do a very, very multi-layered example and they actually are getting it now. And then what I do is I put the quiz on for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. If they haven't watched the video, they won't be able to do the quiz in 15 minutes. Because it's not asking them, if you plug in this number, what do you get? It's like, if this is your scenario, out of this, what is unlikely and why? And they have to kind of think through analytically why one fails and one doesn't fail, and decide, make a decision as to why one conclusion it makes sense given the theory framework. So the questions are less kind of procedural, it's more conceptual. Yeah, George.
Yeah, so of course I have a question about professional development. So as the conversation is happening around campus right now about leveling our TA training, there's a lot of conversation about department specific and a lot of conversation about what can be done for all the TAs. But what this presentation is suggesting to me is that we should also be thinking in course specific ways. So can you talk to me about how much is transportable from the course specific TA training that you did, and how much you feel like it would benefit us, at least with some particular courses, to have course, because 48-hour TA training, it sounded like you did. I mean, that's more than some departments do for all their classes for all their TAs. Right?
So the initial TA, the 2-day TA training we had, it was not course specific at all. We talked about the migrant experience, the book, what it means to not have a sense of belonging. We kind of looked at all the issues that are beyond just mathematics that can affect the students' learning. So we talked about what does it mean to have a stereotype threat? What does it mean to be the only person in your family to come to a big university and survive in the academic expectations? So these are all transferable ideas. I never talk about subject-specific. We didn't, in our training, we never talked about anything that had to do with math problems, because these are the experts, they already know. What we talked about is, what is it that the student is facing right now that is keeping these students from succeeding? And that is the conversation we used to have 48 hours in the fall of 2016, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, we also talked about like math engagement a little bit, which I think that specific stuff is really transferable to most lower division math classes. It sort of breaks down.
Any courses.
Yeah.
It breaks down a little bit in upper division because the students have very different needs at that point. But like,
Yeah.
So like learner's agency, talk about self-regulatory learning, things like that, that how do you make a self-regulatory student? What are some of the components? What it means to be a reflective student versus a student that is always pushed to perform, things like that.
Even,
This should be the university-wide TA training.
I mean, I'd even say there was I mean, we didn't specifically deal with just math 2 questions, but I mean, we talked about framing a math question in terms of scaffolding, but also primarily, and to kind of go back to the lecture video point of, for students at this level, and I would say this is probably good for any entry-level course in any subject area, but uniformity. Like, they needed to make sure that they saw the concepts kind of explained the same way until they, like, completing the square was something that you did not want to have 4 people doing 4 different ways of doing it. So it was important that we kind of had, you know, Nandini had her video, and we kind of made sure that we all kind of didn't diverge too far from that. And then second of all, the video, and something that was good for us to talk about and be aware of, is typically the reason you don't get questions in a math class, and the reason you probably don't get questions in a lot of classes, is students are first being exposed to something. It's kind of that, you know, the pyramid of knowledge, you know, there's the unconscious ignorance. They don't even know what they don't know yet. So it's a little unfair to expect them to frame questions about what they're lost on in the moment that they're first being told something. So it's good that they have a video, or it's good that the teachers like us, we're aware of that, because I mean, we've all been in that situation. At least that's the advantage of being a graduate student. I'm still learning math that I have no knowledge about whatsoever. So it's sometimes important to know that sometimes you are more lost than you think lost is possible.
To piggyback off what he's saying, yeah, math's a lot of that. Like, the first step of learning is learning how to ask a question.
Right.
Like,
And we made it more conversational in the sense that we said, okay, this is the big picture. These are your family members. Where does these family members fit into this big picture? And they had a much more of a understanding of where does all this conceptual framework comes from? Where are all these examples fitting into? Instead of just look at this example and this is how you solve it. So this is the conversation we had, and we really had to make a lot of effort to make sure that we are saying the same language and the same way and the same kind of, so that there was no confusion, because sometimes the transfer of teachers makes a lot of confusions, and we wanted to prevent that in our weekly meeting.
That being said, is there a difference between the sort of conversations that, or not, the sort of instruction that you're thinking about or matching, and then what it means to actually reach a student and sort of understand how they're articulating their question, and then how would you adjust?
So often the way they ask questions is, you can tell if the student is actually understanding the conceptual framework. So if the student says, what do I do with x equal to 1? The question, we ask them, where did you get that x equal to 1 from? And so that's how the framework of the questions happen. And as a matter of fact, for second language speakers, myself being one, having that conceptual framework is what made me understand mathematics. Because only verbal transfer of English language to English language doesn't work sometimes for all learners. And so giving that chance to kind of look at it, kind of personalize it, kind of create an ownership for yourself, where you might want to draw a picture, want to draw a diagram, make a table. These are multi-representations of the same concept. And sometimes they may not say, look at a variable x that is in the fancy language of mathematics. But if they can articulate the concept, we are receptive to asking, taking that as an answer, not be so stuck in the rigidity of mathematics sometimes.
I mean, the most common question when they don't understand is, how do I do this? Or I don't get this. Like, it's not even like, I've done this much. They just say, I don't know, what do I? Because if you don't know math, you don't know how to get started. Like, it's very obvious when they don't understand.
Okay, so I think, thank you all for coming, and thank you.